The white walls of the mansion stood tall and silent, glowing under the morning sun, their paint so bright it almost hurt the eyes if you stared too long. It was the biggest house for miles, its long porch wrapped around the front like a smile that didn't reach the eyes, its clean white windows shining like polished bone. People in town always said it was beautiful, but no one ever said it too loudly. They only whispered. They whispered in shops, in church, on dirt roads, whispers that carried a weight, whispers that died the moment someone walked too close to those fields. Because behind that white paint, behind those polished windows, everyone knew something dark lived there. Not a ghost they could name, not a curse they could prove, but something they could feel in the air like a hand pressing down on their throats. The field workers walked past the house every day, eyes low, steps quick, never daring to lift their heads, because that house looked back, it always looked back, even when no one stood on the porch. The air around it had eyes, the wind around it carried whispers, and the dirt itself seemed to warn you not to look too long. They said if you looked at the house for too many seconds, something would shift behind the curtains, something small, quiet, just enough to make the hair on your neck rise. They said the house breathed at night, like it had a heart, like it could listen, and once it knew your name, it never let you go. It wasn't always this quiet. Years ago, people used to pass the house freely. Wagons rolled by, neighbors visited, churchmen came knocking. But slowly, one by one, people stopped coming. Something about the air around that house made their skin cold, made their legs want to turn back. And soon it was only the family and the workers who lived under its shadow. The plantation stretched far across the Mississippi fields, endless rows of cotton and corn, green and gold in the wind. But no matter how big the land was, the house always felt bigger, like everything around it bowed down to it. Even the trees grew twisted near its fence as if leaning away from it during the day. It looked like any other fine southern house, sunlight bouncing off the white walls, birds flying past, a calm picture. But people who lived close enough knew that when the sun began to sink, the house changed. It didn't make loud sounds, no screaming, no music, just the quiet movement of lights, the soft drag of something behind those windows, and the whispers, always the whispers, like voices crawling along the wooden beams, like someone breathing just behind your ear. They were soft, almost too soft to hear, but once you caught them, you couldn't unhear them. They sank into your bones, and many workers learned to leave the fields before dark, no matter the cost inside the town. Old women told stories about the house, but never with names. They said a sin lived there, an old sin that never left. They said it was planted in the walls the day the house was built, like a seed that grew with every year, and even paint couldn't hide it. Not even God could clean it. They said the house listened to everything, that the family who owned it made pacts with darkness to protect their secret, but no one had proof. No one dared to ask, because everyone who ever tried to speak openly about the house never stayed around long enough to finish their story. Children walking home from church often crossed the dirt road far away from the house. Their parents warned them never to stare, never to whistle near the fence, never to stop. They said if you stopped, the house might hear you. And if the house heard you, it would remember your voice, and sooner or later, you'd hear it call back in the night, not loudly, not shouting, but soft, like a whisper that crawls up through the cracks in your floor. And by the time you heard it clearly, it would already be too late. Every wall inside was white too. White like hospital rooms, white like shrouds, white like something trying too hard to look pure. And the family loved that white. They said it showed power, it showed class, but the workers who cleaned those walls said something else. They said sometimes at night the paint bled, small thin lines like veins running down from the corners, brownish red, as if something inside the walls wanted to come out. They would scrub it until their hands burned, but by the next night it would return thin lines, always from the same places, always under the same windows. The master of the house walked with the confidence of a man who believed no one could ever touch him, his boots polished, his voice calm. He didn't shout much, he didn't need to. The fear he carried followed him like a shadow. His wife walked behind him with a smile too still, too sharp. And their sons laughed loud and cruel like they had already learned the power that came with the walls they lived in. No one dared look them in the eye, even in daylight, because their smiles never felt warm. They felt like knives wrapped in sugar, and the people who worked under them knew better than to forget where they stood at night. The lights on the second floor moved slowly from room to room. No footsteps on the porch, no sound of doors, just the slow glow of a lamp shifting behind curtains. The workers in the cabins near the fields always pretended not to see it. They closed their eyes, prayed quietly, and waited for the night to end, because sometimes the light stopped in one window, and if your bed faced that side, You could feel the weight of someone looking out. Not a friendly look, not a curious one, but something cold. Something that pressed down on your chest like a stone. Something that whispered to you to come closer even though your legs shook to stay away. The town sheriff once said there's nothing wrong with the house. It's just a building, it's just a family. But everyone knew he never stepped past the porch after dark. Not once, and one night when someone dared him to. He went to the gate and stood there for less than a minute, then came back pale and shaking like the cold had crawled into his bones. He never spoke about what he saw. He only warned the others, don't look too long, don't listen too close, and whatever happens, never walk up those steps when the lamps are moving. People talked about the house in half sentences. Whispers at church, whispers near the general store, whispers behind closed doors. They said the house didn't just hold secrets, it ate them. It took every sin done inside and buried it deep in its wood. And over time, those sins began to breathe, to grow, to push against the walls from the inside. And the family who lived there didn't run from it. They fed it. They kept it alive. Because their power depended on what no one else dared to speak. On the hottest nights in Mississippi, when the air itself felt heavy and hard to breathe, the house seemed to wake before the rest of the land. The porch creaked without footsteps. The doors whispered against their hinges, and the lamps burned low and soft like eyes. The kind of light that didn't make you feel safe. The kind that made the shadows look sharper. The kind that made the night seem longer. Those were the nights when the workers locked their doors tight and pressed their ears to the floor. Because sometimes the whispers didn't just stay inside the house. Sometimes they crawled out through the fields, riding the wind, soft, low, like 100 voices speaking in unison but never loud enough to understand. Nobody in town liked to remember the first time the secret tried to come out. An old woman said it started with a storm. Another said it started with a scream. Another said it started with blood. No one agreed on the details, but everyone agreed on one thing. Something behind those white walls wasn't meant to be there. Something old and cruel and hungry, and whatever it wasn't finished. Not then, not now, not ever on this night. The sky had turned gray and low. The wind moving slow across the fields, pressing the crops down like invisible hands. The lamps in the house were already burning, though the sun hadn't fully set. Their light moving, restless, the workers hurried to their cabins. Doors slamming, curtains pulled, dogs whining in corners. The air felt thick, wrong, heavy, like a storm that didn't bring rain, like a mouth opening without sound. The house was waiting, and everyone around it could feel it. They didn't have to see it to know something was stirring inside behind those white walls. Footsteps started, slow, steady, not hurried, not frightened, but calm, like someone walking through a place they owned. And with every step, the lamps on the second floor flickered, as if the house itself was breathing along with the person moving. The whispers crawled out of the corners, slipping through the cracks, soft at first, then stronger, as if the house was calling to the night itself. It wasn't loud, it didn't have to be. It was the kind of whisper that gets under your skin and settles behind your heartbeat, the kind that makes you turn your head even when you don't want to. And as the wind pushed through the trees, bending them low, something inside the house changed. The white paint didn't shine under the last light anymore. It dulled. It turned cold. It looked less like a house and more like a mask, smooth and empty, hiding what was inside. And from somewhere deep behind those walls came a sound. Not a scream, not a shout, just a single soft breath, like something waking up after a long sleep. And in that moment, everyone near the plantation felt the same thing at once. A shiver crawling down their backs, a quiet whisper pressing against their ears, telling them the same silent truth. Behind the white walls, the secret had begun to move. For years, the whispers around the mansion had lived in the fields like weeds, quiet but always growing. The workers had learned to move fast and talk less, because every word near those white walls seemed to echo back at night, and no one wanted to hear their own voice return from the house. The land was wide, flat, and hot, the air thick with the smell of earth and sweat. But no one ever lingered near the porch, not even during the day. They carried water, they picked cotton, they repaired fences, but when the wind came from the house, they kept their heads down and their steps quick. They called it the breath of the white walls, a warm, strange wind that felt too alive to be just air. They said when you felt it on the back of your neck, you needed to run. The first whispers never came from mouths. They came from wood, from the house itself, the way it creaked at night like someone walking through the halls when no one was supposed to be there. Sometimes a light would move from one window to the next without a sound, a soft golden glow sliding past the curtains like fingers. Sometimes it would stop at one window and stay there for hours, as if something behind it was staring out, searching for someone in the fields. No one dared to look back. They just lowered their eyes and pretended the house didn't exist, because anyone who stared too long at that window was never the same after. The old workers remembered the stories better than anyone else. They whispered them in low voices by the fire when the night was thick. They said the house didn't like strangers. It didn't like questions. It didn't like people standing too close for too long. They told the younger ones never to whistle near the house after sunset, never to say the family's name out loud after dark, and above all, never to step near the porch once the lamps upstairs started to move. They said the house listened, and if it learned your name, it whispered it back to you when you slept. One woman who used to work in the kitchen said she heard her own name one night, soft as a breath floating down the hallway from the stairs. She packed her things the next day and left before the sun touched the fields. No one saw her again. Another man said he saw the lamps flicker at the window closest to the dining room, but what chilled him wasn't the light. It was the shadow that followed it, a thin figure moving behind the curtain without ever touching it, tall still watching, and when he blinked it was gone. But the next morning his hair had turned gray at the edges like winter had touched him overnight. The whispers got worse every summer. When the air grew heavy and the heat clung to your skin like wet cloth, that was when the house seemed the most alive. It started small, just a feeling, like someone walking behind you in the field though no one was there. Then came the soft voices, so soft you could mistake them for the wind, except the wind didn't know names, the wind didn't hum in rhythm, the wind didn't whisper from every direction at once. It would slide past your ear and say something you couldn't quite hear, something that made your skin crawl and your heart stumble in your chest. People started leaving the fields before the sun went down, even if the work wasn't done. They said no amount of pay was worth hearing the house speak, because once it did, it didn't stop. It followed you back to your cabin. It slipped under the door, through the cracks in the walls, and sat with you through the night like a breathing shadow. There were stories of people who left town entirely, walking away with nothing just to get away from the whispering. But no matter where they went, some said they could still hear it for a while, soft, patient, calling them back to the White House. The family inside the mansion never seemed bothered by it. They moved through the halls like they owned the wind itself. Their voices were smooth, too smooth. Their steps quiet like they knew where not to make a sound. The master of the house didn't shout like other men. He just spoke softly and people obeyed, because his quiet felt heavier than any yell. His wife was always smiling, but her eyes never matched her mouth. And the sons, they had that same stillness in them, like they had been raised in the walls themselves. Their footsteps were the only ones the house never echoed back. The workers believed the family and the house were one, that the house whispered through them, or maybe for them, no one knew which. They said the family carried the same chill in their voices as the wind that came down from the porch at night, the kind that made your stomach twist, the kind that made you want to move far away but couldn't, because the land itself was tied to that house like a chain. Everything on the plantation moved around it. Every field, every worker, every breath at night from the cabins. The workers could see the upstairs lamps moving again, slow and careful, like someone walking the halls with purpose. No doors opened, no floorboards creaked, only the light sliding from one window to another. The youngest ones tried to stay calm, tried to pretend it was nothing. But the older ones, the ones who'd been there long enough, they knew better. They knew the lamps didn't belong to the family alone. They belonged to something else, something that lived inside the white paint and the wood, something old and patient. One night a storm came through the fields, lightning flashing against the white walls like knives of light. The workers huddled in their cabins, doors locked tight. But even through the wind and rain they could hear the house breathing. They could hear the whispers under the thunder, steady low like it didn't care about the storm at all. Like the storm itself was nothing compared to it. And when the lightning struck close to the porch they saw it clearly for the first time. The curtains upstairs moving even though no one was there. Moving like something had pressed against the glass from inside after that night. No one walked past the house after dark again, not even near the fence. They used the long road around the fields, adding hours to their work just to avoid passing the porch. They said the whispers were stronger that night, sharper, like it was calling out for someone to step closer. And though no one did, the house didn't seem to care. It would wait. It had always waited. It would keep whispering until someone answered. The fear wasn't loud. It didn't come with screams or cries. It grew in silence. It grew in whispers. It grew in the way people lowered their heads, the way their hands shook when the wind came from the wrong direction, the way their prayers turned into begging before they even reached the word amen. Everyone on that land lived under the White House like it was watching them, like it could hear their thoughts, and deep down, everyone knew. The house was waiting for someone to slip, someone to listen too long, someone to walk too close, because once the house had you, it didn't give you back. The stairs that led to the second floor of the White Mansion were always off limits. No one who worked there ever climbed them after sunset, not even when ordered, not even when the master was away. Those stairs weren't just wood and nails. They were a line everyone knew not to cross. The first step always gave a soft moan, the second one a sharp creak, and by the third step the air itself felt different, heavier, colder, as if the house was watching, as if something behind those white walls tilted its head to listen. People said the sound of those steps never left you once you heard them. They said you'd hear it again in your sleep. Footsteps coming down slowly, softly, always stopping just before reaching your door. The second floor held only 4 rooms, but everyone whispered about just one. The locked room at the end of the hallway, the one with the plain white door. No name, no carving, no fancy handles. Just a door that waited, always closed, sometimes warm to the touch, sometimes cold as stone. The house workers called it the room upstairs. Never anything else. They never dared give it a name, because a name made things real. And no one wanted this room to be real. Some said the room was older than the rest of the house, built before the white paint ever touched the walls. They said it was the heart of everything that rotted behind the perfect picture of the mansion. Sometimes, late at night, when the fields were silent and the wind didn't move, the white door upstairs made a sound, not like a normal door, not like a hinge or wood settling. It was slower, a dragging sound, soft but steady, like a hand pressing down on the handle from the inside, testing the weight of the air on the other side. Some workers claimed they heard the latch click open, then close again. A small sound that shouldn't have traveled that far, but it did all the way down the hallway, down the staircase, through the floor, into the kitchen, into the cabins outside, soft as a breath against their ears, the kind of sound that didn't belong to a room built by human hands. One young maid had made the mistake of standing at the bottom of the stairs one night, when the lamps upstairs flickered, and the whispers started to flow through the hallway. She said she saw the faintest movement, the white door not opening fully but shifting just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness. Not the kind of darkness that belongs to night or shadows, but something thick, heavy, like smoke without smell, like air that shouldn't exist. She ran so fast she fell on the porch steps, and the next morning, she refused to enter the house ever again. She left the plantation without collecting her pay. The family always claimed there was nothing in the room, just storage, nothing special, nothing worth talking about. But their eyes always betrayed them. Their voices always shifted when someone even mentioned it. The master's sons sometimes lingered at the top of the stairs after midnight, their faces pale in the low light of the lamps, whispering to each other in tones no one could understand, like they were speaking with the room itself, not to each other. Their mother sometimes stood outside that door alone, hand pressed flat against the white wood, as if listening for a heartbeat inside, and every time she walked away, the air downstairs felt colder. The oldest worker on the plantation used to say the room was never empty. He said he worked there when the house was first built, back when the walls were freshly painted and the fields weren't full of whispers yet. He said even then, before the rumors, before the fear, the room upstairs already had a presence, something you could feel but not see. Something that pressed on your chest like water in your lungs. He said once, only once, he saw a faint light glowing through the crack under the door, when no lamp was inside. A soft pulsing glow like the heartbeat of something waiting to be let out. When the night was still and the house too quiet, some workers heard the sound of footsteps upstairs, slow and steady, back and forth, pacing behind that locked door. It never sounded rushed, never angry. Just a steady rhythm, as if whatever was inside had all the time in the world. As if it had been waiting for years and would wait for years more. One man said he counted the steps once, over and over, back and forth, like someone tracing the same lines on the floor. He said it never stopped until dawn, and when he tried to sleep, the same rhythm echoed behind his eyelids. The family's guests never stayed the night, no matter how polite they were. People who visited in the afternoon always made excuses before the lamps upstairs came on. They said they had long rides home, early mornings, urgent work, anything to keep from hearing the house breathe after dark. Some of them had made the mistake of passing too close to the stairs during dinner. When the laughter grew quiet and the sound from upstairs crept down like cold smoke, they'd feel a pressure against their ears, as if someone whispered their name softly from above. Even though no one was there after that, they never came back. The workers who cleaned the upstairs hallway during the day said it felt wrong even in the sunlight. The air near the white door was always colder, even in the middle of the summer. A still kind of cold, not the kind that chills the skin, but the kind that settles inside the bones, They said the walls near that room sometimes had faint marks, not like scratches but like fingers pressed from the inside, long and thin, the paint always fresh, as if the house itself was trying to hide the fingerprints left behind in the night. One stormy evening, when thunder rolled over the Mississippi sky and the fields bent under the wind, the white door upstairs made a sound louder than anyone had ever heard. The workers downstairs froze, the family went quiet. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath. It was not the sound of the door opening, but something heavier, something pressing, as if the room itself had shifted, as if the weight inside it had grown too big for the walls to hold. And though the door never opened fully, every person in the house swore they felt something crawl through the air, something unseen but real, something that made the floor shiver under their feet after that night. No one went near the stairs unless they were forced. The whispers grew thicker around the hallway upstairs. They didn't sound like a single voice anymore. They sounded like 100 voices overlapping in a language no one understood. The kind of sound that didn't belong in this world. The kind of sound that stuck to your skin and followed you home. And everyone on that land began to understand something they'd always feared. The room upstairs wasn't just a room. It was alive, patient, and waiting. The storm came fast, rolling in from the river like a black wall swallowing the sky. The wind bent the trees until their branches groaned. The first drops of rain hit the porch with the sound of soft fingers tapping, and the white mansion stood at the center of the plantation like a pale skeleton against the dark clouds. The lamps inside were already lit, their glow trembling behind the curtains. The family gathered upstairs. The workers locked themselves inside their cabins, and even the dogs near the barn whined and pressed their faces to the ground. They all knew storms made the house different, louder, stranger, as if the rain gave it permission to breathe harder, as if thunder woke whatever lived inside those white walls. The wind slammed against the front door, rattling the windows, making the wood moan like a living thing. The workers whispered prayers into their hands. They didn't pray for the storm. They prayed for the house not to speak, because when the storm came, the whispers grew stronger. They climbed out of the walls and slid down the stairs, soft and cold, slipping through cracks in doors like water through stone. Some of the older men said the storm carried the voices out, gave them shape, made them hungry, made them reach for anything that dared listen. And on nights like this, no one wanted to be the one who heard first upstairs. The master walked down the hallway with a lantern in his hand, the light trembling with every step, his face hard, but beneath the surface there was something tight in his jaw. He stopped outside the white door at the end of the hall, the door that no one else touched. The wind howled through the chimney, and the handle of the door rattled once softly, like a hand testing it from the other side. The wife stood behind him with her hand pressed against her chest, whispering something too quiet for the storm to carry. Their son stared at the door wide-eyed, not with innocence but with the heavy stillness of people who already knew what waited behind it. The lightning split the sky open. For a brief second, the house flashed in white and silver. The walls seemed to breathe. The wind pushed harder against the windows, and the sound came again. The click of the latch upstairs, the same sound the workers had whispered about for years. Soft, patient, not forced, like someone who didn't need to rush because it already belonged here. The master lifted his lantern higher, and in its shaking light, the white door trembled just a little, enough to make the floor beneath his boots shiver like skin under cold water. Downstairs, one of the young maids had crept from the kitchen to peek up the staircase. She knew she shouldn't. Everyone had told her to keep away. But curiosity is a dangerous thing near places like that. The lantern light from above spilled across the steps, long and shaky shadows sliding down toward her. She held her breath as the lightning cracked again, and for the first time she saw it. The white door was no longer fully shut. A thin line ran through the center, a narrow opening just wide enough to show blackness, not darkness like a room with no light, but black like something alive waiting inside. The sound that followed didn't come from any mouth she knew. It didn't sound human at all. It was soft, deep, and wet, like something breathing in a room that didn't have air. The walls creaked with it. The glass on the windows hummed, and the door opened just an inch more, so slowly it was almost quiet. But the storm made everything louder, turning that inch of movement into something that felt like a scream in silence. The girl at the stairs stepped back without meaning to, her hands shaking, but she couldn't look away, because behind that black line something moved. The master's wife whispered, "It's awake." Her voice thin and sharp like glass cutting through rain, and the master said nothing, his eyes fixed on the door as if he had been waiting for this night, as if the storm wasn't a surprise but a promise finally arriving. He didn't step back, he didn't step forward, he just stood there breathing through his teeth, the sound slow and uneven. The two sons looked at each other but didn't dare speak, because in this house even words could wake the wrong things. And the wrong thing was already halfway awake. The wind slammed against the walls and the rain spilled across the porch in sheets. The thunder shook the ground and the whispers came, not from the door but through it, leaking into the hallway. Dozens of soft overlapping voices, some high, some low, some so broken they didn't sound like voices anymore, just noise crawling out of wood. It poured down the staircase like cold fog, wrapping around the maid's ankles, climbing slowly like fingers. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, but the sound still came out, small and cracked, and it was enough to make the voices shift. As if they had heard her, the door opened another inch, and the lantern in the master's hand flickered hard, the flame bending low as if trying to crawl away. The air in the hallway grew colder, colder than rain could ever make it. It was the kind of cold that comes from something that doesn't belong, something that isn't supposed to be breathing here. The wife covered her mouth. The sons gripped the railing, and for a heartbeat the whispers stopped. The house held its breath. The storm outside fell quiet, not gone but muffled, as if something inside had swallowed all the sound. Then came the hum. It started as a faint vibration in the floorboards, then rose through the walls, soft but steady, the same sound people had claimed to hear for decades, but no one wanted to believe. The sound of the house itself speaking, not in words, not in language, but in a rhythm that pressed against the inside of your chest and told you to run. The maid at the stairs took another step back, her heel hitting the bottom step, and in that exact second, the lantern upstairs flickered out completely, leaving nothing but the storm's gray light flashing through the windows. The door moved again, slow and smooth, not pushed by any hand, but as if it was opening itself inch by inch, revealing a darkness too thick for lightning to cut, a darkness that swallowed every beam of light that touched it. Something inside shifted, not fast, not loud, but in a way that made the floor groan like an old man taking his first step after years of silence. The master lowered his hand as if bowing to something, and the wife began to cry quietly, not from surprise, but from something that felt like ritual, like she had cried this way before. The wind howled again, rain slamming the windows, thunder ripping the sky open, and the blackness behind the door pulsed once like a lung drawing its first breath, and every worker in their cabin froze at the same moment without knowing why, their prayers breaking in their throats, their skin prickling as if invisible hands were crawling under it. The house was no longer holding the secret behind its walls. The house was letting it out, and the storm was its ally. The storm covered its footsteps, the storm carried its breath across the fields. The maid fell back against the wall, clutching the stair rail with shaking fingers. The whispers wrapped around her ears, not loud, not shouting, but so close she could feel them brushing against her skin. Her name was there too, inside the noise, soft and clear, like a finger tracing her spine. And the light from the lightning flashed one last time, bright and white. And for a heartbeat she saw a figure behind the door, not fully formed, not a man, not a shadow, something in between, long and thin, standing perfectly still, waiting. And then the light was gone. The door was wide open and the house exhaled. The storm tore through the fields like a beast unchained. The wind roared against the white mansion, but inside the house another storm had already begun. The whispers that had been crawling through the halls for years now rolled like a flood, rising from the open door at the end of the hallway. Dozens of soft voices twisting together, some broken, some clear, some sounding like they were being spoken underwater. They filled the upstairs corridor, clinging to the walls like smoke, and the family didn't run. They stood where they were, frozen but not surprised, as if this was something they had known would happen all along, something they had lived with for too long to call it strange. And now the thing they kept behind that door wasn't hidden anymore. The master lowered his lantern, the flame already dead, his hand shaking not from fear but from something heavier, something like surrender. The wife's eyes were wet, her hands covering her mouth. The two sons pressed their backs against the wall. The storm outside rattled the glass like the world was trying to warn them. But the house didn't care. The house had chosen its moment. The thing behind the door was no longer waiting. It was breathing. The air in the hallway grew colder than winter water, a breathless cold that bit into the bones, the kind that didn't just freeze skin but crawled deep and slow down at the bottom of the stairs. The maid pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in short, fast bursts. The whispers had reached her, brushing against her ears like soft hands. They weren't speaking in words she understood, but she could feel the weight of them. She could feel them pulling at her chest like invisible fingers. And then she heard her name again, clear and sharp inside the flood of noise. Her own name spoken like a secret, like it had been waiting for her since before she was born. She wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come out. It was stuck somewhere behind her teeth, caught in the cold. The blackness behind the door shifted again. Not like a person, not like something walking. It was too slow, too smooth, like a wave of night rolling forward, its edges thin and sharp. The sound of the floorboards beneath it didn't come like normal footsteps. It came like wood sighing under a weight that wasn't there. The lantern in the hallway would have flickered if it still burned, but the light was already gone, swallowed whole, and the only light left came from the flashes of lightning cracking through the windows. White light for a split second, then black again, like the world was blinking with it. The master spoke then, for the first time, but his voice was low and broken, almost a whisper itself. "It's awake," he said, and the words didn't sound like surprise. They sounded like confession, like something he had said before. Something carved into his throat. The wife started shaking, her hands digging into the fabric of her dress. The sons didn't move, their eyes wide, reflecting the blackness coming toward them. The air was thick, heavy, full of a smell like wet stone and something older, something wrong, like the kind of smell that lives in cellars no one has opened in years. The black wave spilled out of the room slowly, too slowly, like it was enjoying the wait, like it wanted everyone to feel every inch of its arrival. The whispers changed as it moved. They went from soft and distant to low and close, wrapping around the family like a snake. The walls groaned. The ceiling above them made a sound like something dragging its nails through the beams. The house itself seemed to bend with it. The house that once felt like theirs was now moving like it belonged to something else, like it had always belonged to something else. The storm outside roared louder. Thunder shook the windows, but no sound was louder than the silence between the lightning strikes. In those silent moments, the thing in the hallway could be heard breathing, slow, deep, and wet. It wasn't the breath of a man or woman. It was too cold, too patient, the kind of breath that had waited centuries in the dark for someone to open the door again, and that someone had been them. The family that built its fortune on land soaked with other people's blood. The house had never forgotten. The house had never forgiven. The black shape grew taller, stretching upward as if it was taking the ceiling for itself. The air pressed down on their lungs like wet cloth. The wife collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. The sons started whispering prayers, but their voices cracked against the air like broken glass. The master didn't kneel. He just stared at it hollow-eyed, like a man finally looking at the thing he had carried his whole life. The whispers inside the blackness began to separate, some laughing, some crying, some screaming softly, a chorus of everything ever buried in those walls. And they were hungry. The maid stumbled down the last step, but the sound made the whispers shift, like 1,000 eyes turning toward her at once. She froze, her breath stuck in her throat. She didn't need to see it to know it saw her. She could feel it, the way the cold spread down the stairs like water, slow and careful, reaching for her ankles, curling around them like a hand. The white walls of the house didn't look white anymore. They looked stained, like the paint itself was melting into gray, like the house was showing its real skin for the first time. Thunder cracked again. A bright flash of light poured through the window, and in that single second of light she saw it, not clearly, not fully, but enough. Its shape was wrong, its edges not smooth but broken, like a shadow wearing too many faces, faces that blinked in and out of existence, some wide-eyed and silent, some screaming with mouths that didn't make sound. It didn't walk, it slid forward, and the air it left behind smelled like rot and cold river water, like a grave that had been opened too early. The wife let out a short sound, not a scream, not a cry, just a small broken noise. And then the whispers swelled, filling the hallway, filling the house, filling the space between the thunder and the rain. And then everything else seemed to vanish. The storm outside, the sound of wind, even the creak of wood. Everything drowned in that sea of soft, overlapping voices, too many to count, too close to breathe through. And then the blackness moved like a tide, swallowing the master first, wrapping around him like it had been waiting for him the longest. The sons tried to run, but their feet stuck to the floor as if the house itself held them still. The maid turned to run, but the air was heavier now, like pushing through water. She stumbled toward the back stairs as the lightning flashed again, and in that heartbeat of light, the blackness was at the top of the stairs behind her, stretching down like a shadow that no longer needed walls. Its voices followed her, whispering her name, soft and slow, not rushing because it knew. The house had already chosen. The house never let go of what it touched, and outside, the storm only got louder as the door of the white mansion slammed shut against the world. The rain poured heavy through the night, beating against the walls of the white mansion like 1,000 hands trying to get in. But the thing that had crawled out of the upstairs room didn't need the storm. It moved through the house like smoke, dark and wide, filling every hallway. Soaking into every crack of the walls, the thunder outside cracked like the sky was splitting open. But inside the house there was a thicker, heavier sound. The sound of the house breathing, slow and deep. Every window rattling in rhythm with it. Every door swelling on its hinges as if the whole place had become a single, living lung. The white paint on the walls no longer looked clean. It had dark veins spreading under it like something growing beneath the surface. And the blackness moved as if it had always lived there. Only now it no longer bothered to hide. The master stood in the middle of the hallway like a man facing the judgment he had always known would come. His face pale and wet, not from rain but from the cold breath pressing down around him. The shape that had poured from the upstairs room now towered over him, long and broken. Its edges moving like water with no shape of its own. Every flicker of lightning revealed a little more of it. Too many faces, too many mouths. Faces that didn't belong to it but to the house, to the land. Faces of people who had cried and begged in silence, now stitched into the darkness like they had always been part of it. The master didn't scream, he didn't fight. He just whispered one word through clenched teeth. Forgive. But the thing didn't understand forgiveness. It had been built from everything the house had swallowed. It was hunger. It was memory. It was the debt the family could never pay. The wife fell to the floor with her hands over her ears, her tears mixing with the rainwater dripping in through the cracked window. The whispers in the air no longer felt like whispers. They were inside her head, echoing against the inside of her skull like fingernails scratching from within. The sons tried to run, but the floor beneath them bent like wet wood, their feet sinking into it as if the house itself had decided they weren't going anywhere. They clawed at the door frames, but the blackness crawled down the walls and wrapped around their wrists like cold ropes. It didn't drag them fast, it held them slow, pulling them back toward the hallway like a predator that knows there's nowhere left to go, downstairs. The maid slammed her shoulder against the back door, but it wouldn't move. The storm outside made it rattle, but the wood itself felt alive, swelling like it was breathing with the rest of the house. She could hear the whispers seeping down the staircase now, louder, closer, like water running down a wall. The air was so cold it burned her lungs with every breath. The lamps in the kitchen flickered and died one by one, leaving her in the kind of dark that didn't feel empty. It felt full of things moving that she couldn't see. Her hands shook as she backed against the door, and she could feel the house breathing against her spine, not the wind, not the storm. The house upstairs, the shape had grown taller, the blackness stretching into the ceiling, dripping down the walls like tar. Its whispers weren't just noise anymore. They were shaping words, not in English, not in anything human, but the meaning crawled under the skin anyway. The wife screamed, not because she understood it, but because something inside her recognized it. Something old, something buried generations deep. The family had lived in that house for decades, and whatever this thing was, it was tied to them like a knot that could never be undone. It wasn't haunting them, it was them. Their sins, their cruelty, their blood feeding the wood, feeding the walls, feeding the whispers until the house itself grew a voice. The master reached for the lantern at his feet, but when he tried to lift it, his hands went through it like his body no longer had weight. The cold had wrapped itself so deep into his arms he couldn't feel anything anymore. His breath shook in the air, turning white in front of his face. The figure leaned closer to him, slow, bending its broken shape downward until all the mouths stitched in the dark opened at once. Not screaming, just breathing. Breathing into his face like a winter wind. His lips trembled. His knees gave out and he fell forward like the air had been pulled from his chest. The two sons were still struggling by the door, one of them pounding on it until his fists bled. But the door didn't move. The blackness wrapped tighter around their ankles, their legs pulling them back inch by inch. The house groaned. A deep sound from the foundation, a sound that vibrated through the floors like an animal growl. The walls cracked but didn't break. The paint peeled back like skin, and beneath the white was not wood but something darker. A thick black surface like dried blood and ash, as if the house had been wearing its clean walls like a mask all these years. The maid turned her back to the door and ran toward the stairs, her breath shaking, her legs heavy. The whispers were everywhere now, above her, below her, crawling along the ceiling, sliding between the walls like living things. She reached the bottom of the staircase and looked up, and for a moment the world went silent, not quiet, silent, like the house had swallowed every sound. The thunder stopped, the rain disappeared, and she saw the figure at the top of the stairs, tall and thin, its arms dragging along the floor. its faces shifting like smoke, and she couldn't move. She couldn't scream. She just stared at it, and it stared back without eyes. The blackness didn't rush down the stairs. It didn't have to. It spread like cold water poured down steps, thick and patient, and with every inch it covered, the lights around her dimmed, not flickering but disappearing, like the world behind her was being erased. She took a step back, but the floor groaned under her heel like the house itself was laughing. The sound low and deep, like it had been waiting for this moment since the first brick had been laid. She turned and ran toward the back hallway, but the whispers followed fast, surrounding her ears from every direction, like hands pulling her by her hair without touching her upstairs. The shape bent lower over the master and his wife, the sons screaming into their hands, their voices cracking under the weight of the noise. And then something happened that made every piece of the house shiver. The blackness inhaled, long and slow, like it was taking something from them, and the hallway lights went out completely. The storm outside flared one last time, lightning painting everything white for half a second. And in that flash, the master and his family weren't standing anymore. They were floating, weightless, their mouths open but no sound coming out. Their eyes rolled back, their breath frozen. The maid stumbled into the pantry trying to find the window, but before she could reach it, the door behind her slammed shut on its own. The lock clicked without a hand. The whispering voices poured into the small room like smoke, wrapping around her neck, her wrists. The wood of the walls began to pulse under her palms like a heartbeat. And then the whispers stopped, leaving only the sound of her own breathing, sharp and quick. The silence after the whispers was worse than the whispers themselves, like standing in the shadow of something too big to see. The figure moved through the house like a flood that couldn't be stopped, claiming every inch of the floor, every step of the staircase, every breath of the air. The house was no longer a house, it was awake, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm it carried inside its walls. The walls that had listened to cruelty for decades, that had soaked in every scream, every cry, every lie. Now they were speaking, they were answering, and the family's sins that had slept so long were done sleeping. They were walking the halls, and as the last lantern died, the blackness filled the house completely, wrapping it from the inside like a living thing closing its fist. And the only sound that remained in the night was the storm outside pounding against the walls, a world trying to reach in. But nothing was getting out. The storm began to fade before dawn, but the mansion didn't return to silence the way storms normally leave behind quiet air and wet ground. This silence was different, thick, full, the kind of silence that sits heavy on your chest like a hand pressed against your lungs. The rain slowed to a whisper and the thunder crawled away into the distance. But inside those white walls, something else had taken its place, something that didn't belong to the night or the rain, something that had waited for years beneath the skin of the house and now had no reason to hide anymore. The blackness no longer moved like smoke. It sat inside the walls like it had roots, filling the rooms, the stairs, the hallways, breathing slow, steady, patient. The workers in the cabins didn't sleep a second that night. They huddled near their doors, whispering prayers they hadn't spoken in years, prayers that felt too small against something too large. They had heard the storm. They had heard the house beneath it, and somewhere between the thunder and the screaming wind, they had heard voices that didn't belong to the living. The ones who worked the field said they felt the ground shift beneath them, like the house itself was pressing down into the earth, sinking deeper, like the land was swallowing it whole, or maybe it was the house swallowing the land. No one knew which was worse. When the first gray light of morning touched the fields, the air hung heavy. The house looked the same from the outside, the white paint shining faintly through the mist. The porch quiet, the window still, but no birds perched on the fence, no insects hummed. Not even the trees near the house moved, like the entire world was holding its breath, afraid to make a sound. The workers watched from a distance, but none of them dared step forward. They whispered to each other that the storm had left something behind, that whatever lived behind those white walls had finally stepped out of its cage. And now the house was not a house anymore. Inside, the blackness had claimed everything. The walls were no longer clean. They pulsed faintly in the low light, veins of something dark running beneath the paint like the house had grown its own body. Its own blood. The stairs were warped and wet, the rooms upstairs drowned in shadows that no sun could reach. The master and his family were gone, not screaming, not breathing, gone, as if they had been folded into the very wood that had raised them. No one saw them leave because they didn't leave. The house had taken them the way it took sound, the way it took light slowly, carefully, like a thing that enjoys the weight of its hunger. The maid who had run to the pantry was the only one left inside when the night ended. She had spent the last hours curled against the wall with her hands pressed to her ears, but the whispers had never needed to speak loud to reach her. They slid through her skin, they spoke without words, and when the storm finally died, she opened her eyes to find the room changed. The ceiling dripping black water, the window fogged from the inside like breath on glass, and the air colder than ice though the sun was rising outside. She crawled to the door and tried to push it open, but it didn't feel like wood anymore. It felt like pushing against a heartbeat, steady and alive. She whispered a prayer, the same one her grandmother had taught her as a child, but her voice cracked in the middle. The words felt too thin, too small against the breathing of the house. She pushed again, and this time the door opened on its own, slowly, without a sound, as if the house had decided to let her go. Or maybe it didn't need to keep her. Maybe it just wanted her to carry its story, to be the mouth through which the house would speak to the rest of the world. She stepped into the hallway on shaking legs, the walls around her darker now, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and something older, something rotten. The stairs that once creaked now made no sound. She moved down them as quietly as she could, but she knew she wasn't alone. The house watched her with eyes she couldn't see. It breathed against the back of her neck, and every step felt like walking on the chest of something sleeping just beneath the floor. She passed through the kitchen where the lanterns were melted and the table was warped. The floorboard soft beneath her feet as if soaked in water, though nothing dripped. No wind came through the windows. It wasn't wet with rain, it was wet with something else, something the house itself bled. She reached the front door, the one everyone had always feared to approach after dark, and the moment her hand touched the handle, she felt a pulse, faint but real, like a living thing under her palm. Her body trembled, but she didn't stop. She pushed the door open and stepped into the cold gray light of morning. The wind outside was quiet, the storm was gone, the fields were still, and behind her, the house stood silent, looking the same as it always had, a clean white face hiding a grave that had no bottom. When she looked back, for just a moment she saw them, faces pressed against the upstairs window, pale and still, too many faces to count, faces that didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her, their outlines blurred by the thin layer of fog on the glass, faces of people who had once walked these halls, faces of those who never left, and among them, she thought she saw the master and his wife, their mouths closed but their eyes hollow, not alive, not dead, just part of the house now, part of what it had become. Her heart pounded against her ribs so hard she could feel it echoing in her ears. She stumbled down the porch steps, not daring to run, because running would make noise, and the house loved noise. The workers saw her coming through the fog, soaked in sweat though the rain had stopped, her eyes wide and empty. They asked what happened inside, but she didn't speak. She couldn't speak because the whispers hadn't stopped. They had followed her, not in sound, but inside her, settled somewhere behind her heartbeat. Quiet but alive, she didn't need to tell them anything. They saw it in her face. They saw it in the way she trembled when the wind shifted toward the house. They saw it in the way she flinched when thunder grumbled far in the distance. By nightfall, the fields around the mansion were empty. Every worker left what little they owned and disappeared down the dirt roads without looking back. No one wanted to hear the house whisper their names. No one wanted to be the next to feel its cold hands. The mansion stood alone, quiet again but not empty. Never empty. The white walls were clean by the next morning. No trace of the blackness on the outside. Only inside did the house keep its truth. The door to the upstairs room closed once more, as if nothing had ever happened, as if it was just waiting again. Weeks turned into months. No one came back to live there. No one wanted to buy the land. No one even walked near the fence after sunset. They said the house whispered louder now, as if calling to someone, anyone. They said sometimes lights moved behind the upstairs windows even though no one lived there. They said if you stood too close, you'd feel the ground breathing beneath your feet. And if you looked too long at those perfect white walls, you'd hear your name whispered from inside, soft and patient, like the house already knew you'd come. And so the mansion remained, a silent thing standing alone on the edge of the Mississippi fields, its white paint bright against the dark soil, its secrets buried under its own skin. The townsfolk never said its name again. They called it the White House of Shadows, they called it the Breathing Walls. They called it everything except what it really was, a place where sins grew too large to stay hidden, a place where the past refused to die, a place that waited patiently for the next storm.